I never expected that a leaky roof would change my life, but that's exactly what happened. Before all this, my world was a small, contained space, a top-floor apartment in a 3-story brick walk-up, where the city noise was a distant hum and my own thoughts were the loudest thing I heard most days. My name is Lucas. I'm an architectural illustrator, which is a quiet profession for a quiet person. I spend my days with fine-tipped pens and sweeping watercolors, translating blueprints into dreamscapes of what could be. It's a job that requires precision, patience, and a great deal of solitude, all of which I had in abundance. My routine was my sanctuary. Coffee at 7, work by 8, a silent lunch at my drafting table, and evenings spent with books or old movies. It was a life built on careful lines and predictable angles, much like the buildings I drew. And, if I was being honest with myself, it was a little lonely. Not in an acute, painful way, but in a low, constant hum, like a refrigerator you only notice when it finally clicks off. I was content, but contentment isn't the same as happiness, is it? It's more like the absence of overt unhappiness, a placid lake I was afraid to disturb for fear of what might lie beneath. The building itself was old, with the kind of character that really means it had a lot of problems. The plumbing gurgled, the floors creaked with the ghosts of past tenants, and the roof, well, the roof had been a persistent source of anxiety for everyone on the top floor. For years, every major rainstorm was a game of roulette, a question of whose ceiling would show the first telltale brown water stain. Finally, after a particularly wet spring, the building management relented and hired a crew to replace the entire thing. And that's when I first saw him. His name, I'd learn later, was Caleb. I saw him from my window, which looked out over the flat expanse of the roof. The work began in early July, during a stretch of hot, cloudless days. The crew was a handful of guys, all loud voices and easy camaraderie, their laughter carrying on the summer air. But my eyes kept finding him. He moved differently from the others. While they seemed to attack the job with brute force, Caleb had a kind of deliberate grace, a focused economy of motion that was captivating to watch. He was, for lack of a more sophisticated word, beautiful. Not in a delicate way, but in a solid, grounded way. He was tall, with broad shoulders and arms that were corded with muscle from his work. His hair was a dark brown that looked almost black when damp with sweat, and it was perpetually messy. From my vantage point, I couldn't see the color of his eyes, but I imagined they were kind. He had a smile that he didn't use often, but when he did, it seemed to light up his entire face, crinkling the corners of his eyes. I found myself adjusting my work schedule around the roofer's breaks. It was a small, secret indulgence. I'd sit at my drafting table, pretending to be absorbed in the fine details of a Tudor facade, but my focus would be on the man laying down tar paper just a few yards away. He had a physical confidence I'd never possessed, a comfortable way of occupying his own skin that I envied. He seemed like the kind of guy who played softball on the weekends and had a pretty girlfriend who brought him lemonade. He was from a different world than mine, a world of sun and sweat and easy laughter, a world I only ever observed from behind a pane of glass. He was, in my mind, completely and utterly unattainable. The thought of someone like him being interested in someone like me was so far-fetched it belonged in a fantasy novel. So I kept my distance, content to watch and to fold this quiet, harmless attraction into the fabric of my solitary life. It was just another detail in my carefully rendered world, a splash of unexpected color on a monochrome blueprint. I never imagined our two worlds would ever actually collide. But that's how life works sometimes, isn't it? The universe doesn't send a polite email to announce it's about to upend everything you thought you knew. It just sends a storm. It started in the late afternoon. The sky, which had been a placid, hazy blue all day, began to curdle. The clouds gathered quickly, turning a bruised purple-gray at the edges. The air grew thick and heavy, charged with a strange, electric stillness. The roofing crew had packed up early, securing tarps over the exposed sections of the roof with a sense of urgency. I watched them go, watched Caleb toss his tools into the back of a truck, his movements quick and efficient. He glanced up towards my window for a fraction of a second, and for a wild moment I thought he'd seen me. But it was just a passing look before he climbed into the cab and drove away. An hour later, the heavens opened. It wasn't just rain, it was a deluge, a vertical river pouring from the sky. The wind howled, rattling my old window frames, and thunder cracked so close and loud it felt like the sky was being torn in half. I love storms, usually. I love the drama of them, the feeling of being safe and warm inside while nature raged outside. But this time, a knot of dread was tightening in my stomach. The roof wasn't finished. It was vulnerable. And then I heard it, a sound that every top-floor tenant fears, a quiet, insidious drip. I looked up. Above my drafting table, a small, dark circle was forming on the white ceiling paint around the base of the light fixture. As I watched, paralyzed, the circle darkened and swelled. Then, the first drop fell, landing with a soft pat on a fresh sheet of drafting paper. Then another, and another. The drip became a trickle, then a steady, heartbreaking stream of murky water pouring directly from the light fixture. Panic set in. I scrambled for a bucket, shoving my chair and my work out of the way. The water was coming faster now, a miniature waterfall in the middle of my living room, the one place I'd always felt completely safe. I grabbed towels, frantically trying to sop up the spreading puddle on my hardwood floors, but it was a losing battle. My heart was pounding, a frantic drum against my ribs. I felt a wave of helplessness wash over me. This was my home, my sanctuary, and it was being violated by the very storm I had been admiring moments before. My building manager's number went straight to voicemail. Of course it did. Then I remembered the sign posted in the lobby. It had the roofing company's name and an emergency contact number. My hands were shaking as I fumbled for my phone and dialed. A gruff, stressed-sounding man answered. I explained the situation, my voice higher and tighter than usual. He cursed under his breath. Most of my guys are all the way across town. Let me see. I got one guy who was finishing up a job nearby. I'll send him over. He should be there in 20 minutes. I spent those 20 minutes in a state of frantic activity, moving books, rolling up rugs, trying to mitigate the damage. The sound of the water drumming into the bucket was a constant, maddening reminder of the chaos that had just crashed into my orderly life. When the knock finally came, it was firm and loud, cutting through the sound of the rain and the thunder. I rushed to the door and pulled it open, and my breath caught in my throat. There he was, Caleb. He was soaked to the skin, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, rain dripping from his eyelashes. His blue work shirt was a darker shade of blue, clinging to his chest and shoulders. He looked tired and stressed, but when his eyes met mine, they were clear and focused. For a moment, we just stood there, the sound of the rain and the water splashing into the bucket filling the silence. The man from my window, the man from my daydreams, was standing in my doorway, and my life was, quite literally, falling apart around me. "You're the one who called?" he asked, his voice a low rumble, calmer than I would have expected. I could only nod, suddenly feeling ridiculously self-conscious. "Yeah, come in," I managed, stepping back. He stepped inside, bringing the smell of rain and wet earth with him. He took in the scene, the bucket, the soaked towels, the steady stream of water from the ceiling, and his jaw tightened. A flicker of something, maybe frustration or regret, crossed his face. "Damn it," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "I am so sorry about this." He immediately went into problem-solving mode. His presence filled the small room, not just physically, but with a palpable sense of competence that instantly began to soothe my frayed nerves. "Okay, first thing, let's kill the power to this light. Breaker box." I pointed him towards the closet in the hallway, and he located the right switch with an efficient flick. The light went out, plunging the room into the stormy twilight, and suddenly the situation felt even more intimate. We worked together for the next hour in the dim light. He showed me how to fashion a better channel for the water using a plastic sheet and some tape, directing the flow more cleanly into the bucket. I was his assistant, handing him things, holding the flashlight on my phone, anticipating what he might need next. The initial awkwardness began to melt away, replaced by the easy rhythm of two people working towards a common goal. I was acutely aware of his proximity, the way his arm would brush against mine as he reached for a tool, the warmth that radiated from him even through his damp clothes. He wasn't what I had imagined. I had built him up in my mind as this carefree, jocular guy, all surface-level confidence. But the man working in my living room was serious, focused, and surprisingly gentle. He spoke quietly, explaining what he was doing as he worked. He seemed genuinely upset about the damage, apologizing repeatedly. My boss was pushing us to get this section done, he explained, his voice tight with frustration. We should have used a heavier tarp. This is on us. I'll make sure we fix this right for you. There was a moment when he was crouched down, adjusting the plastic sheet, and I was holding the light for him. He looked up to thank me, and the beam from my phone caught his face. I could see the color of his eyes now. They weren't just brown. They were a warm hazel, flecked with green and gold, and they were looking directly into mine. The world seemed to slow down for a beat. The sound of the storm faded, and all I could hear was the frantic thumping of my own heart. It was a look that felt like it lasted for 5 minutes, but was probably only 3 seconds. It was just long enough for me to feel completely and totally seen. As the immediate crisis indoors was managed, he started talking about his craft. He pointed out the way the water was finding the path of least resistance, explaining the complex layers of a roof with an unexpected passion. He had the hands of a laborer, calloused and capable, but he spoke about his work with the precision of an artist. It was in that moment that I felt a real connection, a bridge forming between our two seemingly disparate worlds. Then, my gaze drifted to the wall behind him, where one of my favorite illustrations was hanging. It was a detailed pen and ink rendering of the Grand Central Terminal, a piece I had spent over 100 hours on. Caleb followed my gaze. He stood up and walked closer to it, his head tilted. "Did you do this?" he asked, his voice softer now, tinged with something like awe. I nodded, a blush creeping up my neck. "Yeah, it's what I do." He stood there for a long time, just looking at it. "Wow," he said, finally turning back to me. "That's incredible. The detail, the lines. You have a seriously steady hand." The compliment landed somewhere deep inside me, disarming me completely. It wasn't just a polite comment. It was genuine appreciation. It was him seeing a part of me, the most important part, and understanding it. A simple shared laugh or a casual touch would have been one thing, but this was different. This was him seeing the world through my eyes for a moment, and me seeing the thoughtful, observant man behind the rugged exterior. It was a small thing, a few words exchanged in a dark, water-damaged room, but it felt significant. It felt like the beginning of something. The rain had finally eased from a torrent to a steady, persistent drizzle. The immediate crisis inside was under control, with the bucket catching the now slower drip. But Caleb wasn't satisfied. He stood in the middle of my living room, running a hand through his damp hair, his brow furrowed in thought. "The tarp is still loose," he said, his gaze fixed on the ceiling as if he could see right through it. "If the wind picks up again, it could tear completely, and then you'll have a much bigger problem. I need to get up there and secure it properly." My stomach clenched. "On the roof? Now. It's dark and it's wet. Is that safe?" He gave me a small, reassuring smile, the first real smile he'd given me all evening. "It's what I do," he said simply. "But the access is through the building, right? Through the hatch in the hallway." I nodded, leading him out of my apartment to the narrow service staircase at the end of the hall. At the top was a small landing and a square hatch in the ceiling, with an old, wooden fold-down ladder. Caleb pulled the cord, and the ladder unfolded with a series of loud creaks and groans. It looked ancient and fragile. He tested the first few rungs with his weight, and they held, but the wood was dark and slick with moisture from the humid air. He looked up at the hatch, then back down at the ladder, and for the first time that night, I saw a flicker of hesitation on his face. He was still confident, but there was a new layer of caution there. He turned to me, and his expression was serious. "Hey, I know this is a huge ask," he began, his voice dropping a little lower. "But could you do me a favor? This thing is slick as ice. I just need a spotter. Someone to brace the ladder at the bottom. And maybe stand close behind me on the first few steps, just until I get my footing. I'd feel a lot better with someone there if I slip." My heart started to pound, a heavy, rhythmic thud against my ribs. It was a perfectly reasonable request, a logical safety precaution, but the way he said it, the way he was looking at me, felt charged with something else entirely. "Of course," I said, my voice coming out a little breathier than I intended. "Whatever you need." He started up the ladder, moving slowly, testing each rung before putting his full weight on it. I moved to the base, my hands finding the wooden sides, trying to hold it steady. "Okay," he said after a couple of steps. "Can you come up just behind me?" Just for a second, I took a deep breath and placed my foot on the first rung. Then the second. I was directly behind him now, so close that the back of his damp work shirt was inches from my face. I could feel the heat coming off his body, a stark contrast to the cool, damp air in the stairwell. "Just put your hands on my hips," he said, his voice quiet, almost a murmur, "to steady me. Is that okay?" My mind went completely blank. I could only nod, even though he couldn't see me. I slowly, hesitantly, raised my hands and placed them on his waist. The fabric of his jeans was damp and gritty under my palms. Beneath it, he was solid muscle and bone. My fingers instinctively curled, gripping him for balance as much as to steady him. The world shrank to the space we occupied on that rickety ladder. My chest was pressed against his back. I could feel the subtle shift of his muscles as he reached up for the next rung. I could smell the scent of rain on his skin, mixed with something else, something uniquely him. It was a scent that was clean and masculine and utterly intoxicating. I was so close I could feel the rhythm of his breathing, feel the slow, steady beat of his heart through his back. It was the most intensely intimate physical contact I had ever experienced. It was completely non-sexual, a practical act of safety, and yet it was more charged than any kiss I could have imagined. Every nerve in my body was on high alert. My hands, resting on the solid anchor of his hips, felt like they were burning. I was acutely aware of every point of contact between our bodies, the pressure of my chest against his shoulder blades, the way my thigh brushed against his as I held my position. He paused for a moment, one hand on a rung above him, and he looked down over his shoulder. Our faces were just inches apart. In the dim light of the hallway, I could see the flecks of gold in his eyes again, could see the tiny water droplets clinging to his eyelashes. He wasn't looking at the ladder or at my hands. He was looking at me, and in his eyes, I saw a reflection of the same tension, the same question, the same raw awareness that was thundering through my own veins. The air crackled between us. The moment stretched, silent and heavy, full of unspoken things. Then, as if breaking a spell, he cleared his throat and looked away, continuing his climb. "Okay, I'm good now," he said, his voice a little strained. "Thanks." He reached the top and pushed open the hatch, disappearing onto the roof. I stumbled back down the ladder, my legs feeling like jelly. I leaned against the wall, my heart hammering against my ribs, my hands tingling from the memory of contact. It wasn't just a practical request. I knew it, with a certainty that was both terrifying and exhilarating. Something had just passed between us on that ladder, something powerful and undeniable, and I had no idea what to do about it. After a few minutes that felt like an eternity, Caleb came back down. He moved with the same deliberate care, but he didn't ask for my help this time. When his feet hit the floor of the landing, he avoided my eyes. The easy competence from earlier had been replaced by a thick, charged awkwardness. The air between us was heavy with everything that had happened and everything that hadn't been said on that ladder. "It's done," he said, his voice gruff as he folded the ladder back into the ceiling. "The tarp is secure. It should hold until we can get back out here tomorrow to properly assess the damage." He dusted off his hands on his jeans, a nervous, fidgety gesture that seemed completely out of character. "Well," he said, still not looking at me. I should go." I walked him to my apartment door in a fog. I wanted to say something, anything, to break the tension, to acknowledge what I felt had just passed between us. But the words wouldn't come. What could I possibly say? "Did you feel that too?" It sounded insane. My cautious nature, my deep-seated fear of rejection, took over. I just nodded. "Thank you," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "For everything." He finally met my gaze for a brief, fleeting second, and his expression was unreadable. "No problem," he muttered, before turning and heading down the stairs. I watched him go until he was out of sight, then quietly closed my door. The silence in my apartment was deafening. The next day, and the day after that, were a special kind of torture. The roofing crew was back, and so was Caleb. I sat at my drafting table, trying to work, but my focus was completely shot. My eyes were constantly drawn to the window, searching for him. I replayed the moment on the ladder 1,000 times in my head, analyzing it from every possible angle. It was like I was examining a blueprint for a hidden room, searching for clues that might not even be there. Had he really needed a spotter? He moved with such confidence on the roof. It was hard to believe a simple, slick ladder would have given him much pause. But then again, safety was important, and maybe I was just reading into things because I wanted to. The touch, the proximity, the look he gave me, was it all in my head? Was I just a lonely man projecting his own desires onto a kind, handsome stranger who was just doing his job? My internal monologue was a relentless tug-of-war between hope and fear. Hope would whisper, he felt it too. You saw it in his eyes. He created a reason to be close to you. And then fear would shout back, you're delusional. You made him uncomfortable. He's a straight guy who was in a dangerous situation, and you're turning it into a romance novel. Now you've made it weird, and he's avoiding you. And he did seem to be avoiding me. When I saw him on the roof, he seemed to keep to the far side, out of my direct line of sight. One time, I took my trash out at the same time his crew was packing up for the day. He saw me, and our eyes met for a split second across the parking lot. I felt a jolt, a surge of adrenaline. I gave a tentative little wave. He just gave a curt nod in return before turning his back and getting into his truck. The casual dismissal felt like a physical blow. The hope that had been fluttering in my chest deflated, leaving a cold, heavy weight in its place. I was an idiot. Of course I was an idiot. I had taken a simple, professional interaction and layered it with all my own longing and loneliness. I had embarrassed myself and, worse, probably made him deeply uncomfortable. The anxiety was suffocating. I started actively avoiding my own window, pulling the blinds down and trying to lose myself in my work, but the image of his face, just inches from mine in the dim hallway, was burned into my memory. The lingering scent of rain and the phantom feeling of my hands on his waist were ghosts I couldn't shake. I just wanted it all to go away, to go back to my quiet, predictable, lonely life where the only risks I took were on paper. A week went by. The roofing job was finished. The crew packed up for the last time, and the familiar silence returned to my building, but it no longer felt peaceful. It just felt empty. I told myself it was for the best. He was gone. The source of my anxiety was gone. I could go back to normal. But my normal now felt lacking, a pale imitation of what it was before. The quiet felt less like solitude and more like silence. The contentment was gone, replaced by a dull ache of disappointment. Then, on a Saturday afternoon, my doorbell rang. My heart leaped into my throat. I never got unexpected visitors. I walked to the door, my palms sweating, and looked through the peephole. My breath hitched. It was Caleb. He wasn't in his work clothes. He was wearing a simple gray t-shirt and jeans. He looked nervous. His hair was combed, and he was shifting his weight from one foot to the other. I took a deep, shaky breath and opened the door. "Caleb," I said, trying to sound casual, as if my entire world hadn't been tilted on its axis for the last week because of him. "Hey, what's up?" He offered a small, hesitant smile. "Hey, Lucas. I was just in the neighborhood. I wanted to check on the ceiling. Make sure the patch is holding up okay and that our guys didn't leave any mess." It was a plausible excuse, but we both knew it was just that. An excuse. "It's fine," I said, my voice tight. "Everything's fine." An awkward silence stretched between us. He was just standing there in my doorway, looking at me with that same searching expression he'd had on the ladder. "Can I come in for a second?" he asked. I hesitated for a fraction of a second too long before stepping aside. "Sure." He walked into my living room and glanced up at the ceiling, which was now perfectly patched and painted, as if nothing had ever happened. "Looks good," he said quietly. But he wasn't really looking at the ceiling. He was looking at me. He took a deep breath, like a man about to dive into cold water. "Look, Lucas," he started, turning to face me fully. "I didn't really come here to check on the ceiling, I knew it. I came here because I think I owe you an apology." My stomach dropped. An apology? For what? For making me think there was something between us when there wasn't? "About the other night," he continued, his gaze fixed on the floor. "On the ladder. I lied to you. And I'm sorry." I just stared at him, confused. "Lied? About what?" He finally looked up, and his eyes were filled with a vulnerability I had never seen before. "I didn't really need a spotter," he said, the words coming out in a rush. "I mean, the ladder was a little slick, but it wasn't anything I haven't dealt with 100 times before. I'm a roofer. That's practically a staircase to me." My mind was reeling, trying to process his words. "Then, what?" I whispered. He took a step closer, and my heart hammered against my ribs. "Because I'm an idiot," he said, a small, self-deprecating smile touching his lips. Because I'd been seeing you in your window for weeks, and I thought you were. I don't know. Amazing. And I had no idea how to talk to you. I didn't know if you were, interested, or if you had a girlfriend, or a boyfriend. I just knew that I wanted an excuse to be close to you, just for a minute. And that was the dumbest, clumsiest way I could think of to do it. And I've been kicking myself all week because I was sure I just freaked you out. I'm so sorry if I made you uncomfortable. The wave of relief that washed over me was so powerful, it almost made my knees buckle. All the anxiety, all the overthinking, all the fear, it all just evaporated. He wasn't avoiding me because he was uncomfortable. He was avoiding me because he was just as scared and uncertain as I was. A laugh, a real, genuine laugh, bubbled up out of me. He looked at me, his expression shifting from anxiety to confusion. What's so funny? You didn't make me uncomfortable, I said, shaking my head and taking a step closer to him, closing the distance between us. You made me crazy. I spent the entire week convincing myself that I had imagined everything, that I was just some lonely guy projecting my feelings onto the handsome roofer who was just trying to be safe. His face softened, the anxiety melting away, replaced by a dawning look of pure, unadulterated relief. So, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I didn't misread it. I looked up at him, into those beautiful hazel eyes that I could now see so clearly. No, Caleb, I said, my voice steady for the first time in days. You didn't misread it at all. He closed the remaining space between us in one easy step. He raised his hand, not to my waist this time, but to my cheek. His calloused thumb stroked my skin gently, a touch that was both questioning and confident. And then he leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't like anything I had imagined. It was better. It was slow and soft at first, a question, and I answered by kissing him back, my hands coming up to rest on his chest, feeling the steady, rapid beat of his heart beneath my palms. The kiss deepened, becoming more confident, more certain. It was a kiss full of a week's worth of unspoken tension, of hope and fear and, finally, of mutual understanding. It felt like coming home. In the weeks that followed, my quiet, orderly world was beautifully and irrevocably disturbed. Our first date was on a Sunday. We walked through the city, and Caleb pointed out architectural details on buildings I had passed 100 times and never noticed. The intricate brickwork on a cornice, the elegant curve of a copper gutter. He saw the world with the same eye for structure and form that I did, just from a different perspective. I learned that he wasn't just a roofer. In his small garage, he was a gifted woodworker, crafting beautiful, intricate boxes and small pieces of furniture from reclaimed wood. He had the same steady hands that I did, just a different medium. I, in turn, opened up my world to him. I showed him my portfolio, explaining the history behind the buildings I drew. He listened with a genuine interest that made me feel seen in a way I never had before. He'd watch me work sometimes, sitting quietly in a chair in my studio, content just to be in the same room. My solitary sanctuary was no longer solitary, but it had never felt more like a sanctuary. We found we were two sides of the same coin. He built things that were strong and protective, and I drew things that were beautiful and aspirational. Together, we made sense. The loneliness that had been the quiet hum in the background of my life simply faded away. It was replaced by the sound of his laughter in my apartment, the comfortable silence of us reading in the same room, the low murmur of his voice on the phone at the end of the day. My life, once a collection of straight lines and sharp angles, was now filled with gentle curves and unexpected colors. He brought a warmth and a solidity to my world that I never knew was missing until it was there. He was my foundation. Months later, we were in my apartment on a rainy Saturday night. The sound of the rain against the window pane was no longer a source of anxiety, but a soothing, gentle rhythm. The ceiling above us was perfect, unblemished, a testament to where we had begun. Caleb was sitting on my sofa, carefully examining a small, intricately carved wooden box he had just finished making for me. I was sitting beside him, my head resting on his shoulder, feeling the solid, comforting weight of him next to me. He looked over at me, a playful glint in his hazel eyes. "You know," he said, his voice a low rumble against my ear. "I'm almost grateful your roof decided to spring a leak." I smiled, tilting my head up to look at him. "Oh yeah? And I'm almost grateful for faulty, slippery ladders," he laughed, a warm, rich sound that filled the room. He set the box aside and wrapped his arms around me, pulling me closer. "I'm glad you were there to catch me," he whispered, pressing a soft kiss to my forehead. And in that moment, warm and safe in his arms, with the storm murmuring outside, I thought about how strange life is. You spend so much time building walls to protect yourself, drawing careful lines to keep everything in its place. You think that safety lies in solitude and predictability. But sometimes, true safety, the kind that anchors your soul, is found in the most unexpected of places. It's found in a crisis, in a moment of vulnerability, on a rickety ladder in a dark hallway. Sometimes, you have to risk a fall to find the one person who will always be there to catch you.